Modern.
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 We're prepping for a voyage.
Modern.
The force of an old-fashioned equals whiskey mass times bitters acceleration.
Why don't you make that a double?
Modern Bar Cart.
What's shaking, cocktail fans? Welcome to episode 126 of the Modern Bar Cart podcast. I'm your host, Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for joining me for another terrific interview episode where we carve away the layers of delicious fact and fiction in the spirits world and then serve them with gravy and cranberry sauce. That's right, this is our Thanksgiving episode, and think about it, what happens on Thanksgiving, right? The whole damn family gets together, somebody gets drunk and starts talking politics, and about an hour in, everybody's looking for an escape. And in the cocktail world, nothing says escape like tiki. Our guest this time around is rum wonk and cocktail author Matt Pietrek, who joined me to talk about his book Minimalist Tiki and a whole bunch of other interesting rum and tiki topics. But before we jump into the interview, let's do what we always do here and give you the chance to make yourself a drink. This episode's featured cocktail is the Jet Pilot. This is a classic tiki drink that gets straight to business with 3 different types of rum, 2 types of citrus, 2 sweeteners, and 2 herbal components. To make the Jet Pilot cocktail, you'll need 1 ounce of aged Jamaican rum, 3/4 of an ounce of gold rum, 3/4 of an ounce of overproof Demerara rum, a 1/2 ounce of grapefruit juice, a 1/2 ounce of lime juice, a 1/2 ounce of orgeat, which is a spiced almond syrup, a 1/2 ounce of cinnamon syrup, which is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, 1 dash of Angostura bitters, and 1/4 to 1/2 a bar spoon of Pernod or absinthe. A lot of recipes out there instruct you to add everything to a blender, blitz it for a few seconds, and then pour the drink over crushed ice in your favorite tiki glass. I've personally seen it mixed in all sorts of ways, so I think the important part is get all these ingredients mixed together somehow and then stick the drink in your face. Now, if you back up and look at this Jet Pilot formulation, I just want to point out that it's one of the more beautiful recipes in the tiki world in terms of symmetry. You've got your 2 different citrus juices balanced by 2 types of syrup and 2 herbal bitter components, and then you have a trinity of different rums that all pull in different directions on the flavor spectrum to achieve that complex, heady balance that truly is the essence of tiki. And if you're flying this Thanksgiving, well, you just better hope that your Jet Pilot isn't drinking a Jet Pilot. So, now that you've got a tropical project to keep you busy while Uncle Ed's passed out in the recliner with the football game on too loud, let's turn our attention back to the interview. Some of the topics I discuss with tiki author and rum ambassador Matt Pietrek include how Matt tended a rum hobby while working as a software engineer and then blew that spark of interest into a full-fledged career as a rum author, historian, and consultant. Why intellectual honesty and a thirst for verification set great cocktail writing and scholarship apart from the merely good stuff. What minimalist tiki means. Because, let's face it, when you're looking at a recipe that calls for 8 or more ingredients, there's not a whole lot of minimalism going on. Why the fates and fortunes of rum and tiki are so interconnected in the bar world. How Matt used a quantitative approach to laying out the most important tiki ingredients to have at your home bar. Total software engineer move, by the way. The 4 levels of improvisation in tiki. What it's like to self-publish a book in the age of Amazon and big publisher dominance. What to drink when discussing calculus with Sir Isaac Newton, and much, much more. This is an interview that's been in the making since I met Matt this past summer at Tales of the Cocktail in New Orleans, and I'll be honest, I am thrilled out of my mind that we were able to dig so deep. This is truly a nerdy conversation for all the rum and tiki nuts out there, and Just a reminder, if you haven't already, please head on over to minimalisttiki.com to pick up your copy of Matt's beautifully designed and rigorously researched book. With that, I'll leave you to enjoy this boozy, wide-ranging interview with the cocktail wonk himself, Matt Pietrek. Matt, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Can you just introduce yourself briefly to our listeners and tell them who you are, what you do, and how we came to be talking about Minimalist Tiki today?
Sure. So my name is Matt Pietrek, and I'm now a full-time spirits and cocktail writer, educator, jack of all trades. Prior to this, for 30 years prior to this, I was actually a software engineer, software architect. I wrote a couple of books about how Microsoft Windows works back in the early 90s. It gave me exhibited my passion for sort of going beneath the covers and digging down deeper and really understanding things. And so when the cocktail bug bit me back in 2007 or so, I started making drinks at home, and then at some point I was driving my wife crazy with telling her everything I had learned, and she said, you need to start telling other people, honey, I love you. But and so in 2013 I started writing a blog called Cocktail Wonk, and it's sort of grown from there. Cocktail Wonk the blog, and then there was the Instagram feed, which is now like 35,000 followers, and sort of like every year, I'm surprised at like how much more this has turned into something. And so it was just about a year ago that my wife and I both quit our long-term careers to go pursue new things. I wanted to focus full-time on spirits and cocktails and tiki and things like that, and my wife wanted to go back to grad school for historic preservation. But our very first project after quitting our jobs was to write the book Minimalist Tiki. So here we are today.
So it seems like she's come around then. If she's helping you put together a book, it seems like she's maybe come around a little bit to taking part in the cocktails.
Oh yeah. I mean, she's always been totally okay with the cocktails, and she knows far more than she lets on. But I think it was a realization of like, wow, this is actually something serious, and that it's actually opening doors for us and things like that. Like the places we've traveled and the experiences we've had have been in large part due to sort of going deep and really just following my passion for the whole world of spirits and cocktails.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I love stories of enthusiasts who find a way to transition into more of a professional, relationship with the subject that they're enthusiastic about, because it is somewhat rare in our industry to go from a longtime enthusiast to somebody who is just all of a sudden in the thick of it. But I do think that makes for a really unique perspective. So I wanted to ask you first, I guess, how you got into rum, and specifically how the passion evolved and led you into various tributaries. We shared some emails back and forth before this interview, and so I wanted to kind of let you tell the story of rum through the lens of British naval history and the West Indies trade organization that you're also a part of. So can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, happy to. So I think like many people, my interest in tiki cocktails and rum, originated with a Jeff Berry book. Back in 2007, we were renovating our house. We had to move out, but before we moved out, we had decided we're gonna have a little bar in here, like a small little bar where I can make some Moscow mules and some Dark and Stormies. And when we moved out of the house, we were living in this tiny apartment, and my wife got me a copy of Sip and Safari, and I devoured it. And I had nothing else to do. I was sitting in the apartment at night, and I was dreaming about once we got back into our house, like this little bar, like I was finally going to be able to start making these cocktails. these tiki drinks, but it was like, what is this Demerara rum? What is Jamaica rum? And, all these things, I go to the grocery store and, I see Bacardi and I see Captain Morgan, like what are all these other things? And it was actually hard to get those things in Washington at the time, Washington State. This was Seattle where we were living at the time. And it was hard to get these things. So, but when we traveled, if we went to California or Florida or wherever, I'd bring them home, and I started going, wow, these are incredibly different, and I started getting into like why are they different, and which led me into things like distillation science and things like that, which were sort of appealed to my technical side. My bachelor's degree was in physics, so I've just always been curious as like how things actually happen. And then by by the time I started writing the blog, I was pretty super interested in rum. And then I had a couple of key experiences. One of them, I was interviewing. I had done an interview with somebody, the person who does Denizen rum, and he told me that their custom rum blend, is made in Amsterdam by this company called E&A Shear, and that they go back in time, or that their company history goes back to like 1760s. And I was like, whoa, hold on here. Wait, what? There was this whole sort of like universe. I got a peek behind the door, this whole other universe to the rum world that I had no concept of how it existed. You just, there obviously, there are things like distilleries, like Appleton rum made of the Appleton Estate Distillery. But then, well, what about all these other rums? Like, there don't seem to be a distillery, associated with it. Like, how does this all work? And so I had a series of experiences like that where I sort of realized there's this whole other universe to rum that most people, even enthusiasts, don't really know a whole lot about. And my ability to just get out there and ask questions was very lucky. I ended up talking with some few very informative people, and I started writing what I learned, and that in turn fed the next question, the next article. It just sort of took off, and over from around 2013, 2014, 2015, I was in this mode of just like absorbing everything I could about, different styles of rum or whatever. And then sort of the interest in the rum industry itself took over. And, I started getting, the distilleries would contact me and like, hey, we want you to come see the distillery. Sure. And it just kept feeding on itself. The more I learned, the more I wrote, and the more opportunities presented itself. And my stories just kept getting, geekier and geekier. And I started, communicating one-on-one with distillers like Alexander Gabriel of Masson Ferrand, the Plantation Rum, or Richard Seal, or other distillers. Like I literally started to have direct access to information that most people don't have. And I was like I want to, I have my own questions. How can I share this with, share what I learned? It's like, it's not fair for me to find out all these things and not share it. And then, so like a couple of tributaries of there, the thing with the West Indies Association is called the West Indies Rum and Spirits Producers Association. They're better known as WIRSPA, WIRSPA. WIRSPA is an organization that goes back to 1970 or so, and it's essentially, you can think of them as the NATO of the rum countries, in that none of them are terribly big in the scheme of the global economy. So there's a lot of things where they gain a benefit from working together by sharing information, by negotiating, together, with the European Union or the U.S. or other trading blocs. That there's essentially this organization like, hey, there's a lot of commonality in what we do, and let's work together. And earlier this year, they reached out to me and said, and basically said, we feel like, there's some areas where you could help us, like with some communication about like our mission and things like that. And I went down to St. Lucia and met their executive board, and a complete trip for me. Like if you would have told me 3 years ago you're going to be sitting in a board meeting with the CEO of Appleton Rum and the CEO of St. Lucia Distillers and the CEO of Mount Gay and all these very high-ranking people, and they're all sitting there waiting for me to tell them my thoughts of things. I said, like, what universe is this? So. I don't, specifically am not employed by them, but I basically, help them out with various things, basically almost like a consulting role for them. But that's been very cool. Gives me even more insight into how the global rum world works. And then the thing with the British rum history, funny story. While I was writing Minimalist Tiki, I had a very short deadline to try to get it out the door. In the middle of that, Alexander Gabriel of Plantation Rum emailed me and said, we have a project we'd like you to take on. We'd like to pay you to research the real history of London dock rum and the real history of British Navy rum. Not just what you can find on the internet, but I want you to actually go back and like find the original source documents and learn what we can actually learn about this. Like, where was the rum actually made? What happened to it when it got to London? Who were the merchants that were buying it? How were they aging it in London? What was the real British Navy rum recipe? And, I was, of course, like fascinated by the subject, but had no time because I was trying to get this tiki book done. But I was fascinated, and so of course I said yes, I'll do this. So I threw even more work from the tiki book onto my wife Carrie, and off we went to London, where I was, found myself browsing through, original source documents from the 1600s and 1700s in the British National Archives and the British Maritime Museum, or the British Navy Maritime Museum, and the West India Dock Museum, just all sorts of crazy things that, again, 3 or 4 years ago would have seemed unfathomable that this is my life now. But everything I do just keeps leading to the next incredible opportunity. So I'm very happy about it.
Wow, that is kind of an incredible series of events. And, what it made me think about as you were telling the stories of WRSPA and, this British Naval History Research Project, it made me think about darkness and light in the spirits and cocktail world. And I think it's a tricky and very treacherous place to try and acquire knowledge because there's a lot of parts of the industry that are dedicated to showing us something shiny that looks appealing, but really what they're doing is concealing certain practices that they're doing or certain origins that maybe they're not proud of. And on the other side of things, there are these moments of great brilliance, when you get to interact one-on-one with a master distiller. I'd had a few of these throughout the course of conducting this podcast, of just these moments of something about a spirit or a style of cocktail becoming so incredibly clear just because I have the access to this, a person who's just dedicated so much time to it. So, I think the story that you tell is a really optimistic one because obviously you've benefited greatly from the dedication that you have personally taken on your shoulders to pursue rum and to pursue tiki in as kind of a scrupulous fashion as you have. But man, the whole time I was still thinking, like, this is still such a perilous journey. There are so many ways that this could turn out that don't result in you sitting in this boardroom with these amazing group of people. So it really is cool to step back and look at that and see how well it's turned out for you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think to a certain extent, a lot of this comes from my sort of, my success, if you will, and hopefully not falling into the dark side, if you will, is that, being in tech for 30 years, everything is incredibly rigorous. Every statement somebody makes is sort of like assessed by other people, and and not necessarily then trying to be negative, but there's like just always this incredible like assessing and reassessing and questioning and poking and prodding, and not taking things on face value, but like looking for verification, looking for confirmation. And like you mentioned brands. It's like, yeah, I think they will sometimes, selectively pick parts of a story that sound great, and they'll tell you that parts of the story. I don't know that they necessarily always conceal things, but they may not tell them to you either. I think that, there's a certain amount of intellectual honesty you have to have about what brands tell you, and you take it at face value, but then you verify. And for most people that's hard to do. It's hard to verify things, but when you have access to source material, you can go back and do your own research and basically learn a far better, more detailed version of the story. And I give credit to people like David Wondrich, who's an amazing writer, a personal writing hero of mine. And the books he wrote, and his research, even the most recent article he did on like the history of the scorpion cocktail, you're like, that was work, going back through the Hawaiian newspapers and connecting all these dots. That's something that's relatively new to me, is the ability to do this, but it's sort of fascinating, and it lets you feel like you have a much better understanding because you've seen the original source material. You're not just getting a filtered version of it.
Yeah.
So yeah. There's lightness and there's darkness, and from my perspective, I think what I have to offer is that I'm not, unlike a person with a brand, and to be fair, I love brand people. I'm very good friends with a lot of brand people, but I'm not trying to sell you anything. Like, I don't work for any specific brand. Like, my vision is to tell the most complete and accurate story of rum, or whatever thing I choose to write about. I'm going to give you that with an unbiased, sort of intellectually honest perspective on it.
Wow. Yeah, no, I really love that approach. It's something that really resonates with me. I do want to talk about tiki here, the connection between rum and tiki, what minimalist tiki even means.
Right.
But I love following you on Instagram. We met at Latitude 29 briefly at Tales of the Cocktail this year with our friends from Lion Rum. I started following you on Instagram, and man, before we move on, we have to talk about your trip to Demerara Distillers.
Yeah, that was a real treat for me. That actually came about after my WORSPA, going down, meeting the WORSPA people, and meeting the CEO of Demerara Distillers. That was such an amazing trip. It's one of those canonical rum distilleries, with so much history behind it. And unlike a traditional press tour, press trip where there's like 5 other people, and they sort of have a preset agenda, and it's like 4 hours in a distillery and then we're off to go do something fun. Like, no, they wanted to show me everything, and so it was 2 very intensive days, and I got to meet people like Sean Caleb, and who's legendary, and basically the head of the warehouse, of the aging warehouse, and the head of the distilling plant, the head of the blending and QA. Like, I met everybody, and I got to spend serious time with them, and we geeked out in the stills. Like, we did everything, and and I knew quite a bit going into it, but I still came away like learning crazy little facts, like the fact that those old stills can only be run for 7 days before they accumulate so much scale in them that they basically have to tear them apart and clean it all off and start them up again. Amazing trip. And my goal is to be writing that up, hopefully before the end of the year. But yeah, what you mentioned Instagram, and I think, like, I'm not consciously chasing followers. I just think of Instagram as this is my, my boozy journey. This is what's got my interest right now. And if you like it, you follow along. This is what's got my attention at the moment.
Yeah, and I highly recommend that folks follow you on Instagram. What's the handle, really quickly?
Cocktail Wonk, all one word, like cocktail and then Wonk, WONK. It's hard people will misspell it and not get it. It's got Cocktail Wonk. It's like a policy wonk, but for cocktails, Cocktail Wonk.
Right. Cool. So yeah, definitely recommend that. But let's move on to Tiki here, the topic of this book that is beautiful and that you're promoting. One thing that occurs to me is that there's a connection between rum and tiki in a way that most other spirit and cocktail genre pairing can't even come close to rivaling. If you think of tiki, you think of rum, and if you think of rum cocktails, okay, maybe you think of a daiquiri, but then you think tiki. So, like, what? I guess in your perspective, what accounts for this, like, really close, like, binary star system relationship where they're kind of revolving around each other and their gravities are kind of intersecting in a really weird way?
I mean, I would think, it's a good question. It's hard to answer concisely, but I think that one of the dominant reasons, I believe, is that unlike other spirits, and we'll put a disclaimer up front, I adore bourbon, I adore Scotch whiskey, I love cognac. Like, I love all the great spirits. Like, I love them all. There's no way, dinging any other spirit, but rum has this incredible diversity to it that, if you put 20 different bourbons together on a table, they're going to have differences, but at no point are you going to ever walk up to one of those bourbons and go like, oh, I really think that's a Jamaican rum. Same with cognacs, like, they have envelopes of flavor, if you will. And there's rum, like, I can hand you a Jamaican overproof rum, and I can hand you a 30-year aged Demerara rum, and they're just worlds different, if you'd never tasted spirits before, you would think that they're completely different, made in a completely different way. And rum just has this much larger playing field for people to sort of, play around with and get involved in and start collecting or whatever. And I would say as well, that, again, like bourbons, like, wow, you can have different bourbons, but like with tiki, like if you want to make tiki drinks, well, you need a Jamaican rum, you need a Demerara rum, you need what in the book they call moderately aged rum, you need a rum agricole, and so the whole genre of tiki cocktails lends itself to multiple rums being used in a cocktail. And so, you start buying, the tiki enthusiast starts buying some rums to make tiki cocktails, and it's like, well, I got a Jamaican and I got a, Demerara, and then then somebody will say, well, this Jamaican's even funkier. And I go, oh, well, hey, now I need to try that. And so it sort of naturally leads to almost to like a collector mentality of like I kind of want them all. Or at least I want good examples of all the different styles out there. And again, if you think that I don't think there's any other sort of cocktail category that's as broad as tiki. Like within the tiki genre, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of recipes. But within the bourbon cocktails, there's no sort of canonical list of like 200 bourbon token cocktails that like anybody could name off the top of their head.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it is the tiki world to me kind of resembles the West Indies or the Caribbean. It seems to be made up of a bunch of little islands or archipelagos that are sort of loosely affiliated and share many things in common, right. But there is that thing about islands. We learn this from Darwin in his research. When stuff is on an island, well, that stuff tends to be different from the stuff that's on, right. Another island. It's just that things evolve differently. There's different types of selective pressures.
Oh, well, yeah. that they evolve differently, but they also bring in influences from each other as well.
Right. So, how did you decide on Minimalist Tiki as the moniker for the book, which seems to be about much more than just tiki? But like, how did this idea of minimalism help you to start crafting it?
Yeah. Okay. That's yeah. So it's a good question. I think some people have been confused or like laugh it off like, haha, tiki is anything but minimalist. And like, how dare you call a book minimalist tiki? But the way I think of it is again, I have this sort of scientific approach to things. It's very methodical, and like when I see a whole bunch of things, in some sort of universe, and I see a bunch of things, and I don't see the connection, well, I naturally start trying to group them or understand the relationships between them. And so, at some point, about 5 years ago, I sort of realized it's like, I want to make this recipe and I got to go buy these ingredients. And I got to make this recipe and I got to these other ingredients. And oh, look, my bar shelf is full of weird one-off ingredients that I haven't used since. And I naturally thought there's got to be, some sort of easier way or some sort of way of understanding like what's the important stuff. Like how do you separate out the important things and the less important things, gee, cherry herring, like it's a great cocktail ingredient. I love cherry herring, but gee, I have a bottle and I haven't used it in a year. Like maybe it's not a critical part of the core tiki, recipe, nucleus. And so I had this idea of what if we took a representative, sample set of tiki recipes. And I think at the time it was 15 or 20. In the book, it's 30 recipes. And it's like the recipes like the Mai Tai, the Jet Pilot, Three Dots in a Dash, Navy, Grog, Saturn. Basically a representative set of well-known tiki classics. And then I sat down and I listed out every ingredient, every drink, and I basically put them in columns. And so there was a lime juice column and a pineapple juice column and an orange juice column and an orgeat column and a cinnamon syrup column. And, where things got a little tricky, if you will, is, one recipe might have called for, Havana Club 3 rum, and another recipe called for, a Bacardi rum or for a Rio McCoy 3 rum or something like that. I had to basically say, if I list out every single specific rum, it's just going to be unmanageable. But I said, but these rums, like you can lump these rums together. That you can say like Appleton and Bunny Musk and Hampton are all a Jamaican rum. So I had to create little sort of like categories of rum. But having put everything in those columns, like these are like here are all the columns relating to juices. Here's all the columns relating to syrups. Here's all the columns relating to rums. Here's all the column relating to other liqueurs. It's like created effectively a grid. And then if you count out the number of times, like something is in the lime juice column, you're like, oh, lime juice is used in 14 out of these 20 recipes. And passion fruit syrup is used in 9 out of these 20 recipes. These are good things to have, and when you see like something like creme de cassis is used in one of these recipes, it's not quite as essential. And if you see, cherry herring, then none of these recipes, well then, okay, it's not part of the core tiki canon, and so it's essentially just some very basic statistics that let me realize like the core juices are like lime juice, pineapple juice, orange juice. The core liqueurs and bitters are things like Angostura bitters, Pernod, Falernum, things like that. And essentially, the end goal was to create a set of like a palette, if you will, of like, these are the things that you pretty much should always have on hand at any time. These are the things that are going to allow you to make most of the classic tiki recipes. And we start with the things that are used most often and then add the things that are used a little less often. But the goal is to not have to, have a bar like Smuggler's Cove to be able to make great drinks. And so that's sort of what the minimalist is about. It's really not at all about like 2 ingredient tiki cocktails. It's about working within the set of ingredients that pretty much pervade most tiki drinks.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's kind of like a 10 bottle bar approach to
Yeah,
tiki, which, you're going to have to go beyond 10 bottles
yeah,
inevitably on tiki. But yeah, it seems like that's kind of a useful shopping paradigm for people as well.
right.
To be able to say like, all right, well, I can just kind of start my journey in the densest column and then work my way out to the less dense columns and see
Yeah.
what I like in the process, right?
Exactly, and that's it. And this grid is in the book, and this is all very early on in the book. It's all explained with 30 recipes. But it's about what are the core things you use. And I posted something on Facebook a couple of days ago. I said like minimalist tiki is about working with the core tiki ingredients. It's not about making just simple drinks. It's about working with the core tiki ingredients and not barrel aged banana foam. There are recipes, like butterfly tea flour, pine nut infused orgeat. Like if your bar can make that and can use it and make a great tiki drink, Godspeed. I will absolutely come to that bar and I'll absolutely enjoy that drink and I will celebrate that drink. But it's also not something that I'm going to go tell a home bartender, hey, you should be making this. There are great bartenders out there, and there's many of them featured in the book. Like Jason Alexander, who doesn't use anything crazy in his ingredients. It's like, yeah, he uses a lot, but there's nothing super crazy. There's not, none of his recipes. If you walked into a different tiki bar, would you say, well, we don't have that? There's a sane subset, and that's what I wanted to target the home enthusiasts with. Is like you can do an incredible amount without crazy ingredients.
Right.
And I will say as well that the rest of the book, sort of like that's part one. Part two is more like like maximalist tiki, if you will. And it's like, okay, if you got through part one and you're really digging this, and suddenly your liquor shelves are growing, and you're like, now you want to start lighting things on fire and do dry ice and start making your own syrups. Hell yes, go do it. And here's sort of what I've learned, and sort of like when tiki starts taking over your life, and when you have when your home bar is bigger than your kitchen, which is my state right now. That here's some guidance there. But I wanted minimalist tiki is a catchy title, and I wanted to get the point across of like that this is, you don't have to do crazy ass stuff to make good tiki drinks.
Right. Well, and I was just going to ask about that, because it seems like, all right, great. But what happens, what happens after people get those first 10 bottles? Because then they're going to start, if they're anything like you or I, they're going to start sliding down that rabbit hole rather quickly. So it's good. I mean, and I feel like it makes for a well-rounded book, right? To give the intro, to give the necessary preamble, but then also to, leave room for people to grow into it, later on in the book as they can start adding on skill sets and adding on, drink styles that are maybe a bit more esoteric, that maybe they need to, get a different weird tiki mug for.
Right. And I'm very proud of the section I wrote on improvisation. I came up with like the 4 levels of improvisation within tiki genre of, number 1 is basically just like, tweaking your recipe to taste. And number 2 is second level is like substituting out, like one sort of ingredient for another. And level 3 is innovating with, creating whole new recipes from sort of your existing palette. And then level 4 is like, we're going to introduce something really crazy that's never been in tiki before. Like Ancho Ray's chili liqueur, but like, hey, if you can pull it off, great, go do it. I can't claim to say that I've given everybody every last little detail of maximalist tiki, but I've sort of given them the guidelines of here, sort of here's my journey, and here's where I went, and here's how I safely light rum on fire and things like that. And then, part three is obviously a very detailed section on rum. So I want people to really understand rum so that they can, make intelligent substitutions. When you're looking at a bottle, like, this is, my dog is thumping on the floor there, that they can make intelligent substitutions and things like that. But then the fourth part of the book, which I'm really proud of, is, we got 23 bartenders and bars, great people like Kevin Barry of 3 Dots and a Dash, and Shelby and Aaron Hayes from Lost Lake, and Jason Alexander and Oriel Elias and Lost Lake, the bar itself, and Cane Rum Bar and Rum Bar. We got all these great people who are out there doing great things today. They all contributed recipes that are, fairly within the minimalist tiki ethos of like, a home bartender could actually go make these drinks. I wanted to give people beyond just the classics, the Mai Tai Jet Pilot. Here's some new modern recipes that are accessible to you. And so in the end, there's like over 100 of these recipes that people can play with.
Wow. And so you self-published this book, right? So there's this whole process of not just the research, not just the time that you spent kind of refining the concept and figuring out a way to communicate that clearly to your readers, but there was also the process of literally assembling the book, because this is a full color book. You had to do orchestrate the recipe development with these bartenders, get it all organized, get the photos taken. What was the process of assembling this book like from that perspective?
So again, great question. It's funny when our first thought was, we'll find a publisher for it, and we probably could have, but we kind of in talking with people, we realized that publishing, if you go with the publisher, at the end, the authors don't actually make that much money. Like, you may get $5,000 or $10,000, unless your book becomes a runaway bestseller. You may make $5,000 or $10,000, and that's kind of it. And and then you hear the stories of publishers like they don't want to use the good paper, or they don't they insist that you use this cover photo or whatever. And we're like, no, we have a vision. Like, we know what we want. And we want something that's going to stand proudly on the bookshelf next to the other sort of well-known tiki books. And we had a series of fortunate conversations with people about how to make how self-publishing could work. And we were also incredibly fortunate in that our core team of 3 people were like perfectly suited for the job. Basically my job was content creator and reaching out to bartenders and coordinating like, hey, do you want to be involved, and can we get their recipes? That was my job. My wife, Carrie, who's the other co-author on the book, she was essentially the project manager. She edited it. Before she was in interior design, she was a book editor for a major publisher. So she had a lot of skills in that area. She knows what a book is supposed to look like. She's a book fanatic herself, so she had a very strong vision. She's also an incredibly good project manager. She's been doing this for almost as long as I was doing software. And so, she was the project manager, editor, basically corralled me into getting what I needed to get done on time. And she also happened to, being in interior design, she had great knowledge of the particular software we used, which is InDesign from Adobe. She knew how to use that, at a fairly decent level. But then our third team member was our very good friend Lauren Blass, and Lauren's a professional graphic artist designer. She works for a major software company. She knows her stuff inside and out, and the 3 of us basically over the course of 6 months, did what most publishers would take 18 months to do. So there was a whole lot of frantic work at the end, but at the end we had, the perfect team with the exact set of skills we needed. And we were also very lucky that like a lot of the photographs we used were from my Instagram feed, and they sort of the more of the this is achievable at home, that kind of stuff. But then we wanted great cover photo and some great images, when we introduced rums, things like that. We worked with a great photographer out of Seattle called Justin Alford. But when we worked with him, we went in knowing this is exactly what we want. These are the shots we need. And we did it all in about 3 hours. Same story with the indexer. It's not sexy or glamorous, but we wanted a full index that like every ingredient was indexed by recipe. So I could say like, oh, I just bought pineapple juice, and what recipes can I make with it? You go to the index, there's your list. So there was a lot of little details that we wanted, but again, having a team of just the right people and with doing nothing else but focusing on this book, we were able to pull it off in a fairly short time. And in the end, we sent off a giant file to the publisher, or not publisher, basically the printer. We worked with a print broker. We sent off a giant file and a very large check. This is all our money up front. Like, we had the end, like we got a price per book quote, and we had to decide how many copies we wanted to print, and we had basically paid for all those copies up front. In the end, it was all a huge risk, but we had a strong vision of what we wanted it to be, and we pulled it off. And even now, like, we still do every part of it. Like every order for a book we get, it's me who puts it into an envelope, me who puts it into a box, me who tapes the box shut, prints the label, takes it to the post office. We basically, other than running the printing press, we did everything ourselves, and so we have great control over the quality, and we actually make more money than if we had just handed off to a printer and waited for royalty checks to arrive.
Right. And I tend to really appreciate people who in-house stuff. We live in a world, I think, where there's dozens of online services dedicated to, hey, you don't want to do this? Well, there's somebody in India who will do it for you for X amount of dollars or what have you, right? You don't want to make dinner? Well, there's Uber Eats.
Exactly.
But there's something that gives me a sense of trust, and it's almost like a verification in and of itself when you can walk up to a product, you can touch it, you can turn it over in your hands, and it can look like something that comes out of the big publishing houses, and yet that it was in-house. Like there's a very specific type of excitement that I get from that prospect.
Yeah. Well, wow. Thank you. I appreciate that. Yeah. It like you said, we had a vision. We're both my wife and I were like professionals at the top of our fields, and we were responsible for designing things and leading teams to produce quality products. So we knew what we wanted, and we didn't let up until we had what we wanted. And this was also, I'll add, this was also a sort of a proof of concept for, is this a viable business model? Because I have another book that I want to write, that I hope to start writing soon. But this book was like, well, if we do this and we screw it up, well, at least we haven't wasted that much money. But in the end, it's like, yes, this is viable. Like, you can actually make money doing this and put out a good product. And so, we hope to do more.
Right. Well, that's excellent. Is there any other kind of features of the book that you want to kind of explain to our listeners, things that they might find useful, or just anything else about the book that you want to make sure our listeners hear?
The key points, I think, are that, the first parts are, defining minimalist tiki and giving you an understanding of what ingredients you need, and basically the categories. Like, once you start understanding that all tiki drinks are some combination of juices, syrups, liqueurs, and rums, or maybe some other base spirit. Once you start thinking of them in a sort of breakdown, like, they suddenly get much easier to wrap your head around a new recipe, or around improvising a new recipe. I think that the section on rum, which is probably the least discussed out there, but I really wanted a very detailed section on rum and production, because A, I just love rum, but B, I wanted people to, when you're like holding up two bottles on a shelf and you say, which one should I buy? Is this a Jamaican rum or not? And like, which one should I buy for a cocktail? You have that level of understanding, to make an intelligent choice. And then I think the last section, again, the debate about 100 innovative recipes from modern bartenders, I think is gives people a lot of ways, entrances into the book and ways of finding what works for them.
Yeah, and the cool thing about having 100 recipes is, like one of the affordances of a book is that, well, you can pick it up, you can read it from beginning to end, and then you can put it down. And in theory, you have acquired all of that knowledge. But the cool thing about having 100 recipes at the end is that you can also come back to it. You can pick the book up over and over again, and it continues to yield something new and different, even on those return trips through it, which I think is nice because it's not the case with all books.
Yeah, exactly. We wanted to give you a fair amount of information and in different layers so that, like you said, you can come back to it as you learn more. You come back to it, and maybe you didn't pick up something the first time, but the second time through, you're like, oh, now I kind of get what you're talking about there.
Right. Well, we're going to make sure that we have links to minimalisttiki.com where you can check out the book and place your orders over on the show notes page over at modernbarcart.com/podcast. So for those of you listening out there, that's where you can go to head over to Matt's site, check out the book. But before we get into lightning round questions here, I wanted to just quickly see if there were any emerging trends we should be on the lookout for, either in the rum world or the tiki world, because obviously you are very well traveled, well connected, and sort of, if anyone has their finger on the pulse here, I would hope that it would be you. So is there anything that you're seeing coming down the road that the rest of us might want to prick up our ears and pay attention to?
That's a hard one to answer. I think that on the tiki front, it's interesting. You start seeing new bars popping up left and right. There's a tiki bar here and a tiki bar there, and you start wondering, are people just chasing a trend or a fad? Like will it, can it survive? You want, for somebody like me, I want tiki to survive. I want it to, the good bars to stay around the business. And I do sort of worry that a lot of people are just, chasing this trend and that they don't necessarily, practice craft tiki per se, and that it kind of gets a bad name like it did in the 70s. So you're kind of trying to avoid sort of like the history of like where tiki sort of went into the dark ages. I'd like to see a nice sustainable growth in tiki instead of like an explosion and then everybody walking away from it. I think it is, it's interesting to see that sort of the craft techniques sort of permeating more and more into it. And again, not that every recipe needs, barrel aged banana foam, but I do love to see like when somebody has a new ingredient, like a new akavit or entirely new spirit altogether, that like, hey, let's see if we can do something interesting with it. Like, let's bring some new flavors into it and expand the palette. I say the modern tiki palette of ingredients is far different from what it was in the golden era of tiki. I mean, golden era of tiki, you pretty much never, as far as I'm aware of, saw like these unaged Jamaican overproof rums, the rum fires of the world, and now they're used all over. So I think, there's some good things there, and I think I would like to see more ingredients sort of come in and become sort of a standard part of the palette. In terms of rum, I think, we're in the midst of a rum renaissance, if you will, in that the good brands are starting getting more attention, more bars are stocking better rums. We're starting to finally get an awareness that there's more out there than, the Bacardi's, Captain Morgan's, that kind of stuff, Kraken's, rums, that they're starting to, there are good rums out there. And I mean, just to give you an example, 10 years ago, you could only really buy one Jamaican rum in the U.S., which was essentially Appleton, and it was not particularly funky. It was like one rum from one distillery, and now you can buy rums from every producer in Jamaica or in the U.S. now. So I think we're seeing rum and the much wider variety of rums now available around the world, and we're seeing a lot of interest in even sort of like the less explored parts of rum, like Haitian Clarin or Grog from Cabo Verde. We're like just the insane rums that, again, even 5 years ago you would have been crazy if you thought you could sell it. Now people are snapping it off the shelves. So I think that's a trend that's good. I would like to, hope that it doesn't become as insane as like bourbon is, where, Pappy 23 is, thousands of dollars a bottle. But I think in general, the movement towards, rum being considered, an equal to bourbon or single malt Scotch whiskey is a very good thing.
Right, right. Have you noticed anything in the, I guess, protective classification space like AOCs or DOCs for the rum world? Because, one of the things that we in the industry often say about rum is that it's, of course, it's one of the most diverse categories. It is also one of the least, or at least least consistently regulated categories. Do you see any pushes for protected designations?
Yeah, that's a really great question. That actually is something I'm very passionate about, something I've written about extensively. In fact, I just wrote a rather lengthy article the other day about that. It's common for people to say, writers in particular, to say, "Well, rum has no rules." It's like, well, no, rum has plenty of rules. Go to Cuba, they have rules. Go to Martinique, they have rules. Go to Guyana, they have rules. Go to Jamaica, they have rules. Barbados is working on their own geographical indication. There's plenty of rules, but what most people don't realize is that, like, you can make a rule and it works in your country, but it doesn't just automatically work in every other country. So the fact that, for example, in America we recognize Scotch whiskey as a protected category is entirely the result of American and American Scotland agreeing, like, hey, this makes sense. Like, we'll recognize your Scotch whiskey in exchange for you recognizing like American bourbon, and that you're not going to let a Mexican whiskey be sold as bourbon in England. So there are higher level sort of geopolitics and trade discussions that go involved into getting your GI or your rules recognized somewhere else. And rum is in the unfortunate position of most of the rum producing countries. Again, like Jamaica, Barbados, Trinidad, Guyana, they're relatively small on the world stage. And so they absolutely could be protected, in the United States or in the EU, but they really, you take the steps to get them protected. It doesn't just come for free. But I think the first step is just getting these rules in place. That realistically, the first earliest rum regulation of this form I'm aware of is only from 1996, which was the original Martinique AOC. And it's only since then that, like, we've seen, the Cuban, I think it's the DOP, Martinique AOC. Jamaica was in 2016, I believe. Barbados is still in flight. Guyana was 2017, I believe. There are these rules out there, but they're all fairly recent, and they have a lot more to go before you can hope that anybody in the EU or in the US is going to say, wait a minute, that's not really Jamaican rum. It was made in Panama, for example.
Right, right. Well, it seems like progress is being made, so that's I don't know if it's a good thing. It seems to be a neutral thing. People are regulating things. Sometimes that's good, sometimes that's bad. I guess we'll see, how it gets handled, but obviously, the thing to notice here is that obviously, as you noted, these places are low leverage places,
Mm-hmm.
and I think one way to, for home consumers listening there, one way to give these places more leverage is to ask for their spirits more often.
Yeah, for sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
And another thing again they can do is collectively work together. Like, if you get enough countries in the Caribbean to work together to actually say, like, hey, we're going to go to the U.S. and we're going to say, we want you to recognize all 7 of our GIs, for example, and in exchange we'll recognize bourbon or whatever, negotiated deal you make up is, they'll have more leverage doing that. And again, there are organizations like CARICOM or WORSPA, who I mentioned earlier, who can help coordinate these sort of things.
Nice.
So there's more power in working collectively for Caribbean rum, than it is for each individual country trying to go at their own.
For sure, for sure. Well, Matt, this has been fascinating. Do you have a minute to jump into some lightning round questions?
Let's do it.
What's your favorite cocktail? And if you don't have a favorite of all time, what's something you've been recently obsessed with?
Oh, my stock answer to that would be a Mai Tai, and I do love a properly made 1944 Mai Tai. But sometimes a well done Jet Pilot is also amazing. The answer could change from day to day, but I tend towards the tropical drinks, the tropical tiki drinks with that where the rums really stand out.
Is the Mai Tai like the old fashioned of the tiki world?
It is sort of I would say that the old fashioned tiki world would be more like the daiquiri. It's not really a tiki drink, sort of like proto tiki, if you will.
Right.
But it's sort of like, if you think about it, an old fashioned is a great way to evaluate a spirit because like the spirit really punches through. The same thing in a daiquiri. I'd say the Mai Tai is definitely like the king of the tiki drinks. It's sort of like the high art, if you will, and it's actually a relatively simple recipe compared to some of the other ones, but it just sort of like stands alone as like this is like the pinnacle, and very few people disagree that it's not sort of like if you could have if you were going to put a tiki drink onto a spaceship and send it out into space to represent tiki to another culture, it would probably be a Mai Tai.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. If you were a cocktail ingredient, what would you be and why?
I would probably be a Jamaican rum. The particular hogo funk flavors of Jamaican rum are just they're like if you've never experienced it before, and I've done this with people, you give them their first taste of an actual funky Jamaican rum, and I'm like, whoa. Oh my God, I had no idea. It's like I just love it. It's just it's and there are different styles of Jamaican funk depending on which rum you drink, but there's all have this common, there's like primal thing in the back of your head. It's like, this is what rum is. Now I get it.
Yeah, I love Jamaican rum. I think it's one of my favorite styles, if not my favorite style. As you were saying that, I've got a really cool story. It's really quick. I just want to share it with you on air. I was in Baltimore a couple weekends ago. My father-in-law used to be in the Coast Guard, so he's big into boats. And so he trailered his boat up to Baltimore Harbor, and my wife and I went and we stayed overnight on this boat. And we got to cruise around the Baltimore Harbor. And of course, that is the location of the Domino's Sugar Factory.
Oh, yeah.
And I was like, I drive through all the time, and if you drive through at night, you see the big Domino's sign lit up. It's like a part of the city skyline. And we were on the boat, so we had the chance to go really, really close to it. And I wondered, I was like, man, I really hope it just smells like molasses or like smells like sugar.
Right.
And can confirm, in fact, that if you drive the boat close enough to the Domino's Sugar Factory, it kind of smells a bit like a rum distiller. Obviously, they're not making rum, but it's got that like molasses scent emanating off it into the Baltimore Harbor.
Right, and there's actually a Domino's factory down here as well. I think it's one of the biggest in the world. And it's interesting. I've started doing a little research on this. I become a sugar nerd as well. Like you can't really understand rum history without understanding sugar history, and you realize that in the early days, for the most part, and less so now, but essentially the sugar was only partially processed in the Caribbean. Like they basically would do the boiling it off, collect the raw sugar, which today we might call brown sugar, but they would basically ship that very basically processed sugar off to somewhere else, like England or America, where then the sugar factories here would do like the subsequent refining, basically clean it up, remove more of the molasses, basically turn it into white table sugar. So there's this difference between a sugar factory like you're talking about versus like, what you see in the Caribbean where they're literally crushing cane to make cane juice and then creating molasses and sugar from that. So.
Right, exactly. And there was a giant tanker pulled up beside it, and we were all speculating. We're like, "Oh, well, I wonder what was on that tanker. Was it molasses?
Yeah.
Was it like So it doesn't relate to your Jamaican romancer, but for some reason that smell, that really distinctive smell, reminded me of that.
No. Yeah, the Caribbean smells are amazing, and so even when they're awful, you're like, but I know what this is going to become, so you're okay with it.
Right. If you could have a cocktail with anyone in the world, past or present, who would it be? Where would you go? What would you drink? Just kind of paint us a picture.
Oh my. I kind of would give you two answers. I mean, if you said like, who would you most like to meet in the world? I would love to, go back and meet like Isaac Newton, for example. Just again, it's my physics background, but basically just like he was so pivotal to sort of like the world changing, with the calculus and and all of the theories. I would love to sort of go show him basically show him like, here's what your brain and what you came up with. Here's how the world has changed as a result. And I of course would love to drink a daiquiri with him while we showed him all these things. But then I guess the other answer would be I would love to go back. And probably have a cocktail with Don Beach, just because I said we have this sort of tiki revival movement now, and people like Jeff Berry have done an amazing job of like recreating it and going back and finding original sources. But we're still at a certain level, we're hypothesizing about things, and we think it was like this, whatever. I would love to go back, and sit with Don Beach and drink his original zombie. And then maybe I'd go next door and have a real 44 Mai Tai with Victor Bergeron.
Yeah, you get to maybe see how Don's mix.
Yeah, exactly. Just to really experience, like I said, we have an idea of what the ingredients were, but things change. Like the taste of lime changes, syrups may have changed. Like the rums we have now are not necessarily the rums we have then. I would love to actually, and I'll tell you a really quick story as well, unrelated, but I recently got to drink, got to taste the Harewood House rum, which was distilled in 1780. Which is an amazing experience. But when I wrote about it, I said, it's not, I was incredibly lucky and it's an amazing experience. And it's not so much because, it's the best rum in the world or because it's old, it's better. It was probably pretty, everyday rum when it was made. But it's this little time capsule. It's this for a brief few moments. When you're tasting it, you're like, okay, you get to go back in time and you get to actually see what it actually was like, and not just what you think it might be like or what they're making similar in the modern era. So, I said we talk about the past, but we still don't actually get to go experience the true past, except in little moments like that.
Yeah, so, I think that's why the brandy houses call their historical repositories the paradis. It's almost like you are literally walking into the afterlife and communicating with the ancestors who made this stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really cool. So getting into the advicey stuff now, are there any books besides yours about rum or tiki that have been particularly influential or enjoyable to you? I know you mentioned Jeff Berry's Safari book. Any others?
Yeah, I mean, I think all of Jeff Berry's books and as especially like Potions of the Caribbean is great as well. I think he did a 10th anniversary Sippin' Safari book as well. I mean, I love Jeff's writing. Jeff is a great historian, and ditto for Martin. The Smuggler's Cove book is great, and that it was sort of a daunting task of like, who am I to, come out with my own tiki book and say like, I have something to say, when the Smuggler's Cove book is out already. I think we pulled it off. But like I said, those are great resources. And, in the introduction in my book, I actually say like, I think of, people think of Jeff and Martin as these like, amazing tiki bartenders. And it's like, I personally think of them as more like great historians who through their work have sort of captured this core of tiki before it sort of vanished, before the people died off or whatever. They've captured it and are sort of spreading that word to the modern world. In terms of rum books, I like Fred Minnick's book. I was disclaimer. I helped Fred. I was sort of a technical editor, a reviewer on Fred Minnick's Rum Curious book. Actually, a lot of some of the older books, which are really interesting. I think there's a great one from 1982. I think it's called Rum Yesterday and Today, which is not terribly well written, but just its snapshot of the rum industry at that moment in time is really great. I tend to, these days I tend to get a lot of my rum information from like original sources and not so much by reading other books. And it's not to say that there aren't great books out there. I'm just like, I'm not constantly referring back to, any particular rum book, or any particular tiki book, beyond the ones I've mentioned. And I said, and I'm good friends with the other authors, like, Shannon Musfer. I think her book is great. It's I tend to be, to focus more on research and less on just reading, which seems kind of strange, but that's how my brain works.
Right. Well, I mean, think about it this way: the spirits and cocktail industry is a sensory industry, and reading is a very kind of you might call it a mono stream type way of interacting with information. Whereas if if you're doing more of the hands-on research, you're going to be getting a better rounded, more stereo view of what you're actually pursuing. So right. I don't think that's a bad thing at all.
Yeah, and for example, once you start getting into research, historical research, you realize newspapers are great sources, and it turns out there are multiple online, newspaper archives, and once you get used to working with them, you're like, there's an amazing variety of information out there that that pull up interesting stories left and right, and just it's out there. You just gotta pay the price of admission, but then the universe opens up for you.
Right. Well, we'll link to the books and publications that you referenced over on the show notes page over at modernbarcart.com/podcast.
Yeah.
And
I have one more. I'll tell you real quick. As a website, a great rum website. I particularly like the Lone Caner. My friend Lance. He writes very, very eloquently about rum and has a great perspective on it. So
cool. Yep.
So we'll add that up there. So sorry, go on.
No, love electronic resources as well. So just to wrap up, we talked early on about this, kind of 10 bottle bar approach to, building your tiki, using or building your bar for tiki cocktails using the most common ingredients, which I think is such great advice, such a practical approach. It should really be the only approach for home bartenders. Looking to get into this. But besides that, is there any advice you have for folks who want to start getting more into rum or tiki?
I would say, for rum in particular, there's a bunch of great bottles out there for like $30 or $40. I've written articles, other people have written articles, but literally, it's inexpensive enough to where you can start exploring rum. For a couple $100, you can get a pretty wide swath of what's out there, and find out for yourself. What's good. You don't have to spend $200 or $500 to get an amazing bottle. There are great values out there. In part because rum hasn't become like bourbon. Buy things, explore things, talk with people, use the online forums, like Facebook. Facebook has a bunch of groups who are, related to rum. They have a bunch of groups related to tiki. Dive in there, and, stand your ground. Sometimes they get, people get, upset with each other, or they become very opinionated, but, don't let that stop you. Get in there, ask questions, use the online forums. But trust your own nose and your own palate, and just explore. It's not super expensive to buy some great rums. It's not super expensive to buy some limes and some and a pineapple and things like that, and start making your own tiki drinks. Just get in there and do it. And don't worry about necessarily having it be perfect the first time. We all learn. I'm still learning techniques today. just sort of like do it and practice it and ask questions and leverage the enthusiasts around you.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, how can people best A, find and purchase the book, and B, digitally connect with you any way you want, whether that's email, social media, whatever?
Yeah. So I try to be pretty consistent in my branding. For me personally, in the work, unrelated, it's sort of orthogonal to the book. It's Cocktail Wonk, all one word, word cocktail and then wonk, WONK, Cocktail Wonk. And so that's Instagram, that's Twitter. Cocktailwonk.com is my website. My email is cocktailwonk@gmail.com. And then for things related to the book, it's minimalisttiki.com. It's all one word. It's minimalisttiki.com. And there's also a Minimalist Tiki Instagram account, for example. And there's also, just for fun, if you're a true rum nerd, you just want to see all sorts of weird, interesting bottles that I've come across. I also have one called Rum Wonk. It's like Cocktail Wonk, but Rum Wonk, which is also on Instagram. There's also Cocktail Wonk Facebook group or page, if you will. So basically, if you search for Cocktail Wonk on Google, you're going to find pretty much everything I have.
Awesome. Yeah, and I literally just followed Rum Wonk on Instagram right now, so I'm excited for that.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Matt, man, this has been fantastic. I'm really grateful that we were able to meet at Tales of the Cocktail. I think that speaks greatly to the kind of the delight and the delicious density of enthusiasm that surrounds that event. And I think it's people like you that make that event special. That give it sort of that gravity that makes people like me want to keep coming back and learning. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us. And
thank you for having me.
Yeah, hopefully at some point we can maybe do an in-person podcast and talk about some more rum stuff.
I would love to do that. I'm very appreciative of giving a little platform here, and these are great questions. I enjoyed this thoroughly.
Thank you. And for everybody listening, show notes page, modernbarcart.com/podcast. Please pick up your copy of Minimalist Tiki. It makes a great holiday gift. And
it does.
If my wife has made it this far through the podcast, then I think she knows what to get for me. So until next time, I'm Modern Bar Cart CEO Eric Kozlik. Thanks for listening.
Hey everybody, thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, there's two big things you can do for us here at Modern Bar Cart. One would be to tell your friends and family if you think they'd enjoy listening to us talk about cocktails. And if they don't download podcasts, they can always stream our episodes on their desktop directly from the show notes page at modernbarcart.com. The other thing you can do to help would be to head on over to iTunes or wherever you download your podcasts and leave us a review. 5 stars are great, but we're more interested in your feedback. And the beauty is, the more reviews we have, the easier it will be for other folks out there to learn about our show. We're trying to start a cocktail revolution here, and by spreading the word, you're helping us fight the good fight. You can always reach us by emailing podcast@modernbarcart.com if you're looking for cocktail or bartending advice, or if you're a pro who would like to pull up a mic and be interviewed for all to hear. Also, definitely follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Modern Bar Cart for cocktail porn, recipes, and entertaining tips. And keep an eye out for new product releases and special offers, which are happening all the time. We love our listeners, and we really enjoy giving you exclusive discounts and sneak peeks at our latest and greatest cocktail projects. This episode may be over, but for you, the mixological fun and adventures are just beginning. So remember, folks, drink responsibly and experiment boldly. This episode was made possible with editing and production assistance by Samantha Reed, a ton of tiki and rum wisdom courtesy of the Cocktail Wonk Matt Pietrek, and a little bit of interview magic by yours truly. This has been a Modern Bar Cart production, copyright 2019.